It's Friday night. You're tuned into Tysky Sour, and we are talking about some seriously big news this evening. We have elections across the UK. We're mainly going to be talking about England today because that's where the results have come in thickest and fastest. And so far, it's looking very, very bad for Keir Starmer. We're going to go through the results. We're going to talk about the reactions. Long story short, Keir Starmer's saying, I take full responsibility while blaming everyone but himself. We're going to dissect that nonsense, which we've heard from everyone on the front bench today. And there is no one I would rather go through discussing this political roller coaster than Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
Michael, it's so good to be joining you this evening. I wouldn't rather be sharing the show with anybody else myself. So this is a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably lots of people who have been watching the television today who've been screaming at it because we've heard so much poor analysis from people, adopting motivated reasoning. So we're going to cut through some of that crap. As ever, we would love to know your thoughts, especially on such a big news day as today. So do tweet them on the hashtag TyskySour, and we'll go to some of your comments throughout the show. Of course, if you are new to the show, do hit subscribe. We're here 3 times a week, not just after massive election results. We're going to be going, we'll be talking a lot about Hartlepool in one moment. First of all, I want to take you through where we currently stand in the election results. They're trickling through, as I say, slightly slower than usual, apparently because of COVID. There's more restrictions in terms of how people can assemble and count. But let's start with the English election results as they currently stand. So these are very good for the Conservatives and rather poor for the Labour Party. So the Conservatives are up 151 councillors as it stands, and Labour are down 161. The Lib Dems are down 119. Sorry, the Lib Dems are down 19, and the Greens are up 30. So you can see that big gains for the Conservatives, big losses for Labour. And I think we can now see where we are currently standing in terms of councils, which is the Conservatives have gained 7 councils. They've gained control of 7 councils. The Labour Party have lost control of 4. That's with 60 out of 143 having been declared. We don't have many of the mayoral elections through yet. Some of them that we do are Doncaster, which Labour have held, and Liverpool, Labour have held, and the Tees Valley Metro Mayoralty is held by the Conservatives. They won a stomping majority there. We're going to be talking about that. And when it comes to Wales and Scotland, super early days in both of these elections, partly because of the electoral system they use, additional member, which means we first get the results from constituencies, but it could dramatically change when they count the party list. So it's too early to say what's going on, but what we do know, there are 22 of 60 seats declared for the Welsh Parliament. So far, Labour have lost 1 constituency to the Conservatives, but overall, Labour's vote share is looking pretty strong. So it looks like they're going to end up in a very strong position to form a government once again. In Scotland, the SNP have gained 2 constituency seats, 1 off Labour and 1 off the Conservatives. That's with 38 of 129 seats declared. So still a very long way to go there, and it will only be after they've counted those list votes that we'll know whether or not the SNP have got that much coveted absolute majority. Now we're going to go to the story which is going to dominate this show probably, because this is the one where we have the final results, and it was an incredibly interesting election. Hartlepool. Now, given the polling beforehand, many people expected Labour to lose Hartlepool, but no one really that I'd seen expected them to lose quite as badly as they actually did. So it was a stomping majority for the Conservatives. Jill Mortimer got 51.9% of the vote. That was up 23 percentage points from 2019. Labour, 28.7% of the vote, so down 9 percentage points from 2019. Now, Labour losing vote share there is super significant because people were saying, oh, if Labour lose this seat, you can't make any strong judgments because basically that's just the Brexit Party vote collapsing and going to the Conservatives. It's nothing to do with Labour. Very, very hard to make that argument if Labour have actually gone back in terms of vote share. That's why we've seen different arguments today than we'd seen earlier in the week. Earlier in the week, we saw the arguments, oh, this was always going to go to the Conservatives because of the Brexit Party vote collapsing. Now they're having to say, oh, the reason Labour have gone down in vote share is because of X, Y, Z, Corbyn. We'll go through all these. I don't want to preempt it. First of all, let's take a look at the Conservative candidate who has won, who's obviously jubilant. Here she is. It's Jill Mortimer after the results were announced.
I'm incredibly proud of the campaign my team and I have run in Hartlepool. It's based on local issues of real concern to the community here. And I would like to thank all of the people of this great town who've responded so positively to it. I'm also immensely proud to be the first Conservative MP in Hartlepool for 57 years. Not only that, I am the first woman ever to be elected as MP for this town. It's a truly historic result and a momentous day. Labour have taken people in Hartlepool for granted for too long. I heard this time and time again on the doorstep. People have had enough. And now, through this result, the people have spoken and they've made it clear it's time for change.
Now, Aaron, it is pretty extraordinary there. The Conservatives have been in power for 11 years. They've just won a by-election and their candidate, on winning it, is saying it's clear this vote for the governing party after them being in government for 11 years is a vote for change. I mean, it's extraordinary. What's your big picture take with the result we saw in Hartlepool?
Oh, well, there's a big picture and there's a small picture, Michael. And so I think on the one hand, yeah, you want to talk about the big sociological trends. You want to talk about the sort of the politics of how the Tories are seen by many people as effectively a new government since Boris Johnson came to power in the middle of 2019. So they aren't looking at an 11-year government. They're looking at a 2-year government. But Labour got lots of basics really badly wrong. And I think it's really important to say that before talking about the big stuff. They picked a terrible candidate. They parachuted in a Remainer not from the seat. And that really upset people. I'm not saying Labour would have won it with somebody else, but that was entirely avoidable. What were they in control of? The candidate. The timing. They decided to do this at the exact same time as the Teesside mayoral race, which, as we've seen, has been an incredible success for the Tories. The candidate up there for the Tories, the incumbent, Ben Houchen, very popular. He's a Tory who took the local airport into public ownership. I think he won by 73 to 27. They held this by-election on the same day as all these other elections to save money. Again, entirely avoidable. And that's really worked against them because it allowed the Tories to tell a story about Hartlepool compared to what, with a Labour MP, compared to what's going on with the Teesside mayor and Ben Houchen. So those are two really avoidable things. And then you look at the run-up into these elections just generally, which also applies to Hartlepool. You lay off 90 members of staff before an election. Are they really going to be motivated? No. You lay off the community organising team, which we know played a seismic role in keeping, I think it was Lincoln and Peterborough, in a by-election, a really critical by-election in 2019. You lay them off. And of course, the members who've been so important in terms of canvassing operations and so on, you basically demobilise them, tell them you actively don't want them in the party. So all of that stuff was in Labour's control. The margin never had to be like this. I personally thought the Tories were going to win it, but not like this. I mean, my God, they almost got double the Labour vote in Hartlepool. This was a place, yes, it was a marginal, but the Labour majority was 3,500 last time. And by the way, they got 52% of the vote as recently as 2017. So the idea that this was inevitable, that somehow it was inevitable the Tories were going to get double the Labour vote, completely ridiculous. And it's a synthesis of those shorter term issues. Terrible leadership by Keir Starmer, terrible decisions by his office. The candidate was picked by Jenny Chapman, Keir Starmer's political advisor. She was the MP for Darlington. Darlington voted massively to leave. She's got such political now, she decided to be for a second referendum. Guess what? She lost her seat. Just like Paul Williams was for a second referendum and a leave seat in Stockton, he lost his seat. So then, because this is a Labour Party under Keir Starmer, Jenny Chapman, the loser who made the wrong call, picks Paul Williams, the loser who made the wrong call, to be a candidate in somewhere that voted 70% leave. I can't imagine a more ridiculous set of circumstances. So we could talk about the sociology, we can talk about the changing nature of demographics and property ownership and all that, and it's all valid. But all of the stuff I've just listed was eminently avoidable. And I think it betrays a Labour leadership, which I think is unprecedented in both its incompetence and its misunderstanding of how competent it is. Keir Starmer is a fundamentally useless, vacuous politician surrounded by useless advisors, and they really think they are the dog's bollocks. They had this coming, and believe me, it can get a lot worse.
I've got no doubt it can get a lot worse. Jesus Christ. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. You very eruditely put there the case for why this is Keir Starmer's fault. Obviously, front bench politicians were out on the airwaves this morning, desperately trying to plead that no, it wasn't Keir Starmer's fault. The fault lies elsewhere. Let's take a look at Steve Reid explaining the catastrophic results on Radio 4 this morning.
There's no hiding from the fact this is a shattering result for Labour, absolutely shattering. And for a town like Hartlepool that's been Labour for the half a century to now be in Conservative hands is heartbreaking for anybody who is Labour. And it tells us that the pace of change in the Labour Party has not been fast enough. We need to quicken it up. We need to speed it up. We have a breach of trust between too much of the British electorate and the Labour Party, and we haven't done enough to repair it over this past year.
Well, that couldn't be clearer. You're not making excuses. You're saying that Keir Starmer will go faster. But what does that mean? Faster to what?
Well, the last general election 18 months ago now, we suffered our worst defeat for 85 years. People simply no longer trusted the Labour Party to do the things that we said we would do. But I think there was almost a breakdown in relationships with the Labour Party. They no longer believed that we were caring about them. We were inward looking. We were backward looking. We weren't focused on the future. We weren't focused on aspiration. What Keir described as a mountain that we had to climb, that was absolutely the right way to describe it.
No, I mean, we could have predicted that's what they were going to come out and say, but it's still, shocking to see it happening. He's saying the pace of change has not been fast enough. The explanation for why they've gone backwards, because on every metric they've gone backwards in Hartlepool, is that the pace of change has not been fast enough. What we should have done is just what we were doing, but more, faster, quicker. We should have rejected Corbynism and expelled him a month before we did, right? Now, these arguments might have worked if Labour increased their vote share but lost the seat because more of the Brexit Party vote went to the Conservatives and went to Labour. You could, I still don't think it would be a particularly strong argument, but you could plausibly go out with a straight face on national television and national broadcast and say, look, we're going in the right direction. We've increased the vote share. We just need to move faster so that we can win these difficult seats. That argument does not work when you've gone backwards on every metric. They've lost 9 percentage points compared to when Corbyn was leader in that disastrous election, as they love to call it. No one's pretending it wasn't disastrous, by the way. But what we're saying is you can't say we're building on that when you're doing worse than that on every metric. The other thing that, really frustrated me about what he said there, and this will be, again, something that we find in most of the Labour front benches, including the leader himself, come out with, is they say the problem is the party is too inward-looking and stuck in the past. Then the only thing they talk about is previous Labour leaders. So we're too inward-looking, we're too stuck in the past. And essentially this is because of Jeremy Corbyn. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is a member of the Labour Party. I know he's not an MP anymore, but he's a member of the Labour Party. Talking about him is inward-looking, and talking about a previous leader is stuck in the past, right? If you think you're too inward-looking and too stuck in the past, then tell us something about the future, which is exactly what no one on the Labour front bench, including Steve Reid, is able to do. And I want to go straight on to a tweet from Wes Streeting, who's also a shadow minister from the same wing of the party. He took a very similar line to Steve Reid. He said, "I'm so sorry for Paul Williams' Labour and the brilliant team who've been slogging their guts out in Hartlepool in recent weeks. Our leadership has changed for the better, but the voters aren't convinced that Labour has too. This is a huge and urgent task. Keir gets it, so must we." So his argument there is our leadership has changed for the better. Keir Starmer, he's doing great. He's changed for the better, but he's being dragged down by the party which he inherited. Again, this would work if they'd increased their vote share slightly, but still lost the seat. It doesn't work when you've gone backwards on every metric. They obviously preferred Labour under Jeremy Corbyn than Labour under Keir Starmer. That's why less of them voted for Labour. I'm talking about Hartlepool constituents here. One more, I suppose, evidence of this delusion although it's not really delusion, it's malicious, isn't it, is a briefing to Liz Bates, who is political correspondent at Channel 4 News. So she tweets, Labour source, just because we have stopped pissing in the bath doesn't mean people want to jump in with us straight away. Less people want to jump in the bath with you. Like, how dense do you have to? Less people want to get in the bath because you're pissing more than the previous guys. Aaron, I mean, were you as infuriated watching all of this as I was?
Can I be vulgar, Michael? Do you mind?
You can be vulgar. They've been vulgar. It's the Labour sources who are being vulgar.
They were vulgar. Well, Labour have stopped pissing in the bath and they've started shitting and vomiting it instead. Look at the results across England. Not in Wales, by the way. We'll talk about that later. Wales, very different. They have started shitting and vomiting there instead. There's all sorts of garbage coming out of all sorts of orifices. Steve Reed is the anus and Wes Streeting is the mouth. These are delusional sycophants. My God, I know they had their lines prepared ahead of time, but come on. You have to have a little bit of elasticity. They're like comedians. This is like, you couldn't come up with a satire or a sort of sketch show taking the piss out of these people and make it any funnier than this. Obviously, we're looking, by the way, at a horrendous set of results. It gives me absolutely no happiness to say any of this. But the response was, watching it today, particularly Steve Reed, was genuinely funny. I thought, who the hell is this guy? Who the hell is this guy? He's got a majority of, I think, more than 10,000. Imagine if you're an MP with a majority of like 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. You're thinking, Christ. And they are, by the way, having second thoughts about Starmer, thinking, I'm going to lose my seat with this guy. And then Steve Reed is saying that. They think exactly the same thing we do, Michael. They're not, they're not, well, a lot of them are morons, but not all of them, and they'll be saying, Steve Reed is delusional. Unreal. But what's really interesting, Michael, is I think Keir Starmer genuinely believes this stuff. I genuinely think Keir Starmer believes this stuff. I genuinely think he thinks he's going to be the Prime Minister. Amazing. Amazing. And people, I'm sure there's some people who go, oh, Labour, Hartlepool, whatever. It was going to happen. Labour got almost 22,000 votes in 2017. They almost got a third of the votes they got in 2017. A third, right? Come on. This is like so spectacularly obvious. Stop it. We can have a really interesting conversation about, is Anas Sarwar better than Richard Leonard in Scotland? I think he's probably doing a better job. Yeah, this is not a factional thing. Let's be empiricists. Let's observe what's happening. Come on. You look absurd. Stop doing it. Stop shitting and vomiting in the bath.
Let's look at the vote share in. Actually, this is the absolute votes actually in Hartlepool over time, because the message we're being sold is that they're clearing up Jeremy Corbyn's mess. Let's look at how it has changed over time. Super interesting graph was tweeted today. So from this, you can see that from 1950 to 1997, in almost every election, the party got over 25,000 votes. It's between 1997 and 2004 that completely plummets. Obviously slightly lower than usual because it's a by-election, so it's slightly lower turnout. But you can see it's plummeting, goes up for one blip. That blip is 2017 when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. Then it goes down in 2019 to still slightly above what it was in 2015, by the way. And then it's under Keir Starmer that it plummets to under 10,000. So the idea that they're cleaning up Jeremy Corbyn's mess. Jeremy Corbyn was the one thing in the past 30 years that seemed able to stop secular decline in Hartlepool. So it's completely ahistorical. And I'm not saying that as someone who I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was perfect, but you can't say that they're clearing up his mess in Hartlepool.
Michael, can I say one quick thing?
Not empirical. Yes.
I'll be really super quick. Michael, Labour aren't going to get 40% of the vote in the next general election in 2024, which will mean that the 2017 general election was the best set of results for Labour in 23 years. And this is the one set of results the entire Parliamentary Labour Party refuses to look at. They refuse to look at it. And as long as they refuse to look at it, as I've said time and time again, they will continue to lose seats. The one upsurge, like you say, is the thing they don't want to talk about. And Hartlepool, by the way, like you say, Hartlepool, Labour kept, forget Corbyn, Labour kept this when Brexit was a live issue. It voted 70% leave. Yes, of course, there was a Brexit party and so on, but they still got a much larger vote than they've just got today with Keir Starmer when Brexit was still an issue, right? I think they got, 14,000 votes in the last election. They just got 8,000 something votes. Yes, I know it's a by-election, turnout slightly lower, but Brexit was still a massive issue. Come on. Anyway, enough about Hartlepool. Just This bullshit's not going to work. Steve Reed, Wes Streeting, stop humiliating yourselves like this in public.
We've got 3.8 thousand people watching. There's too many. I've got too many numbers in my head today. Just over 600 likes. Do smash that like button. It helps us in the algorithm. We're going to go through some of your comments very quickly. 999 Sean with a $5. Labour has a messaging issue. They're unable to wield social media to their advantage. They've got a messaging issue, but I think the issue is actually more fundamental than that. Is what is their message? When you talk about messaging, it's normally how are they selling their policies? How are they selling their vision? If you don't have a vision, how can you sell it? I mean, that's their fundamental problem. Their social media also is crap, right? But I think the problem goes deeper than that. Andrew Bergman tweets on the hashtag Tysky Sour: is Starmer's style of leadership functionally indistinguishable from somebody intentionally trying to ruin the party? He might be an asset. I mean, I'm joking. I doubt he's an asset, but I mean, it's a good question. How, if someone wanted to make the Labour Party completely irrelevant, would they have behaved, which is different from Keir Starmer, putting up a support with the people's vote in one of the country's most heavily Leave constituencies, whilst actively pissing off all of the people that made 2017 quite successful, young people who were quite interested in social democracy. Bizarre. Dan Stringle with 25 quid. Great show, helping us retain some sanity as ever amongst the utter delusional responses from Labour sources. I'm sure when I saw that from that Channel 4 News reporter, I was thinking they must have had a really, really enjoyable brainstorming session when they decided, oh, what are all these lines we can use blaming Corbyn for us not winning the seat? And as Aaron said, they're completely irrelevant now. They don't work in the situation they found themselves in, but they just got to tweet them out anyway. And obviously these reporters do their bidding for them. Chris Hill with 50 quid. Do you guys think the Labour Party can be salvaged, or is it time to move on and form a true socialist party? And I'm going to combine that with Mo Sidden with a $5 who says, appreciate all the work Novara does. Considering how Labour is so disappointing, what would you suggest people do to try and make change? I'm sure we'll come back to that. But Aaron, actually, can I get you to give your initial thoughts on those two questions in a sort of 60-second soundbite?
Okay, so do we need a new party? Look, there are 3 Labour leaders, effectively. There's many more. There's 4 or 5. There's Mark Drakeford. It looks like Labour have had a pretty good day in Wales. There's Scotland. Labour have gone backwards, but it's, there is clearly a tide now for independence in Scotland, and the left is also a part of that conversation. So I think it's kind of on its own trajectory. You've got Andy Burnham. Let's see, but it looks promising. You've got Sadiq Khan. Looks terrible, but he's still going to win. You've got Salford. It looks like it's going to be a good night for the mayor of Salford. It looks like it's going to be a good night for Preston Council. There are socialists in some very strange places being elected against the odds as councillors. And so, yes, there are some good stories here. Mark Drakeford, I think, is the outstanding story here. Let's see how it works out for Labour. It looks like voter turnout's gone up and Labour's share of the vote's gone up. Maybe we can talk about that shortly. So it's particularly in England, it's particularly in the north and the Midlands of England where Labour are doing terribly, particularly the Midlands. So, for instance, in Newcastle, I don't think there's a single Tory on the council. Even in Sunderland, yes, Labour are losing councillors, but the Lib Dems are the variable. In the Midlands, it looks like we're seeing a real clean out by the Tories in lots of places. Also in the north too, but of course that was the story of the north, the Red Wall and so on. So I think it's a really complex picture. I don't think people should be down, because I think there's also socialists being elected on a message of hope. And I think there's actually going to be some really impressive stories coming out over the next couple of days with specific councils. So don't give up and don't say, well, it's because of a left-wing message. Keir Starmer fought this campaign. He was targeting the Red Wall. He said this was all that mattered, and he focused on beer and flags, and he's been smashed. That's the conclusion. That's the conclusion here. And so it tells us that genre of politics where you say the media matters more than activists, where you say that no message doesn't matter if you've got a guy who can wear a suit and has a nice head of hair. We know that's been found out. And I have to say, Michael, I think we're looking at the worst set of results ever for the Labour Party in England in one day, in terms of the historic context. I think this is the worst possible outcome. Does that mean you need a new party? I don't think it does. We can have that conversation, but I don't think that's the priority by a long stretch of the imagination. My God, Keir Starmer beat the left. Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party. Do you think the Labour left is capable of doing much right now? No. It's got some very talented people, but it clearly needs to reformulate, reorganise, and try and now set the agenda over the next 5-10 years. Beyond electoralism, to answer the second question, there's so much that we can do. Get involved at a local level. If you are a Labour member, run as a councillor. Like I say, there's going to be some amazing stories of local activism winning. The Tories have prevailed in so many places on the basis of deep organising in communities around particular issues on a hyper-local basis. That's exactly what the left needs to do in the workplace, but also beyond it as well. And it's doing it to some extent, but it clearly needs to grow on that. And I think I'll finish with this. We now need a new generation of socialist leadership in this country, particularly in England, both within the Labour Party, beyond it, in the Labour movement, culturally, in communities. That's got to be the task now. So I'd say the fundamental question when you're doing your activism is, am I helping build a new generation of socialist leadership, particularly in English politics? Keir Starmer clearly ain't doing that. Are you?
Very well put. Some very astute questions. We're going to go straight on to Keir Starmer himself. Keir Starmer took a few hours to break his silence after Labour's catastrophic defeat in Hartlepool was announced. However, he clearly didn't spend that time preparing anything concrete to say. Here he is looking pretty irritated and saying nothing of substance on the BBC.
This is not a question of left or right. It's a question of whether we're facing the country. We have changed as a party, but we've not made a strong enough case to the country. We've lost that connection, that trust, and I intend to rebuild that and do whatever is necessary to rebuild that trust.
But what does change mean in, say, policy terms?
It means stopping as a party, quarrelling amongst ourselves, looking internally and facing the country and setting out that bold vision for a better Britain and changing the things that need changing.
What is that vision?
That is the change that I will bring about.
Len McCluskey, Unite General Secretary, says people don't know what you stand for. What is that vision?
Our vision is of a country that ends the injustice and inequality that millions of people face every day. But fundamentally, we have to show that we are facing the country, that we've learnt the lessons of this bitterly disappointing set of results.
You say you take personal responsibility for the results. Are you up to the job of Labour Party leader?
Yes, and I intend not only to take responsibility for the results, but to take responsibility for fixing things. And I will set out what change is needed over the next few days, but I'm absolutely clear in my mind and absolutely determined to do whatever is necessary to fix things and to make sure we can make that case to the country in a compelling way.
What are you going to change over the next few days? What are you referring to?
I will set out what we need to do to reconnect the Labour Party to the voters that have cast their verdict on us last night, particularly in places like Hartlepool. We have changed as a party. We have changed as a party, but we need to go further and we need to set out that strong case to the country, and we have not done that.
So you're going to set out a new policy agenda, is that what you're saying?
I am going to set out a strong case to the country, learn the lessons of the elections that have come in so far, and accept that we must reconnect and rebuild trust with working people, particularly in places like Hartlepool.
Can you give us any indication of what it is you're going to be
Well, I'm not
talking
going to set out a policy agenda in this interview, but I'm going to set out how we reconnect and rebuild that trust.
He's like a parody of himself, like a parody of a politician who believes in absolutely nothing. So we say, we're going to change. He's asked, what does change mean? Oh, we're going to stop squabbling. We're going to set out a bold vision. Well, what is that bold vision? Our vision is to face the country. We're going to face the country and stop talking about ourselves. So what are you going to do? What are you going to change? Well, I'll reconnect with the voters we lost. But how? I mean, how are you going to appeal to them? I'll look outwards instead of looking inwards, twirling all the time. I mean, it's embarrassing. She says, well, do you have any policies? Well, I'm not going to tell you my policies on the television. Why would I tell you my policies here on the television? That would be a ridiculous thing to do. I mean, Aaron, that was almost like awkward to watch, wasn't it?
Well, did you watch the end of it? I mean, we don't have the end of the clip, but basically she's kind of like, we're obviously not going anywhere. She audibly says this, and she's just like, should we just finish there? And he's like, yeah. I mean, she's just like, this guy's a clown. And the BBC they are quite deferential to politicians. Even with Jeremy Corbyn, you wouldn't hear that on air really. And it's a night of the realm. You know, they're meant to be like, we are not worthy, and she's just like, you're clearly an idiot. And also where this was taking place, Michael, Keir Starmer, and by the way, being a human rights lawyer, perfectly fine thing. Living in London, perfectly fine thing. But these are the sort of political cliches. Keir Starmer, Remainer, Sir, establishment, London, human rights lawyer, lives in Zone 1, completely out of touch with the rest of the country. Where does he do the interview? In the House of Parliament. What's behind him? Some parliamentary, you know, some folios of various parliamentary nonsense and, you know, data and whatnot. Where's Boris Johnson? Boris Johnson is in Hartlepool, next to a ship, hundreds of years old, talking to people, thumbs up, face mask on. Who's more relatable, Michael? Keir Starmer has no policy, no idea, no organisational competence. And worst of all, I think, actually, we do live in an era of populism. I'm sorry for the hashtag FBPE crowd who don't want to admit that, but we are. He is so unlikable. I've said this repeatedly. Nobody watches that guy and thinks, you know what, I'm really rooting for him. And some people might not like Corbyn. A lot of people had that feeling with Jeremy Corbyn. I'm really rooting for him. Yeah, go on. You know, at least he knows what he believes in. Nobody can say this about Keir Starmer. He's a non-entity who is so dislikable immediately. And I think the fact that he was doing that interview in what was, you know, the aesthetics of it were just so politically distant from what was happening in Hartlepool, that dissonance between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer embodied so much for me. And it just shows, actually, Keir Starmer, the grown-ups are back in charge. Well, you know what? A media professional wouldn't be doing that interview there. So not only is Keir Starmer not good enough, but nor are the people around him.
And I think that's, I mean, what really comes out from those interviews, because, you know, he's been Labour leader for a year, and presumably he wanted to be Labour leader for a while before he stood to be Labour leader. We know it was a very well prepared leadership campaign. Yet anytime he, or indeed anyone else in the party, is asked, what's your vision? Very basic question, actually, for a politician. It's not a question really intended to catch people out, or it shouldn't be. He looks terrified. Our vision is to look out to the country. Our vision is to change the party. I mean, these are like subheadings. These are like subheadings of a strategy you could have, but they still haven't filled in the box. You know, it's to be in that job for over a year and not have anything to say to that question. I just find it, you know, difficult to fathom. It just seems like gross negligence, gross incompetence from people who are presumably on quite good salaries. I mean, I suppose maybe you can't come up with a vision if you don't believe in anything. I suppose that's probably the easiest explanation for what's going on here. They're asking Starmer, what do you believe in? He says, I believe in having values. I believe in believing things. I believe in showing the country that I believe in something. It's like, well, what do you believe? It's like, I'm not telling you that. I'm not giving that away. Completely bizarre.
Rather than saying, you know, people with values, if you have values, it's about being honest. How do I know you're honest? It's because you act with honesty, you know, or you're generous. There are actions that you express, which are they distill the idea of, you know, generosity. Keir Starmer's like, I have values. I am electable. And you see this nonsense coming out, by the way, from Steve Reed, Wes Street, and all sorts of people. We've become more electable. The electorate just don't know it yet, right? But, you know, you've got this complete detachment from these words and what they actually mean. This is like political Dadaism. This is like if Pablo Picasso was trying to create a politician. You know, it's like the Guernica, one horse's head going this way and that going this way, and the whole thing's just a complete mess. You know, it's non-representational. None of it's actually meant to make any sense. It's not meant to look like the real world. That's what Keir Starmer interviews increasingly look like.
No, you're absolutely right. You mentioned Boris Johnson choosing a better spot for his national broadcast than Keir Starmer. We do have that for you, so let's take a look. This is Boris Johnson in Hartlepool with the town's new Tory MP, Jill Mortimer.
A massive thank you first of all, to the people of Hartlepool for placing their confidence in us, in the Conservatives. I want to congratulate Jill on a fantastic campaign. I think that she's been a wonderful candidate and fought very, very hard for every vote, and I think she'll be a wonderful MP. And for me, what this means is that I think that it's a mandate for us to continue to deliver, for not just for the people of Hartlepool, not just for the people of the North East, but across the whole of the country. And I think if there's a lesson out of this whole election campaign, the whole local election campaign across the whole of the UK, it's that the public want politicians to get on with focusing on their needs and their priorities. So coming through the pandemic and making sure that we then build back better, and you can see some of the evidence of economic confidence that the Bank of England's been talking about, the prospect of a really strong rebound in the second half of the year. I think people want us to focus on that. And I think that here in Hartlepool, clearly people were, this is a place that voted for Brexit, and we got Brexit done, and then we're able to do other things thanks to that.
So one, I mean, it's, as Aaron said, very importantly, he didn't do that speech from Parliament. He went to Hartlepool. He's doing it in front of like a historic ship. There's sort of some narrative there. You can hear the seagulls. It just seems less miserable. Obviously, it's easier when you've won to do that TV interview than it is if you've lost, but nonetheless. But I suppose what really stuck out from me there is the thing Boris Johnson didn't say is, yes, the reason we won is because we're looking outwards. The reason we won is because we have values. The reason we won is because we have a vision. No, he actually filled out the blanks. So he said, people like it when things are delivered, like we delivered Brexit, like we got people through the pandemic. Now we've got free ports in Hartlepool. I mean, free ports are a terrible idea, by the way, but at least you're naming something. You're saying something. There was some content there. And Keir Starmer has, nothing in response to that. I mean, why would you vote for the guy who's telling you I have values than the person who's saying I've actually done these things? Not I've done things, I've done these things. It's concrete, it's real. You feel like the guy is not actually terrified when he's speaking to a camera because he has something.
I think you're being very unfair to Keir Starmer, Michael. He did do something last week. Do you remember what it was? He went to John Lewis.
Yeah, he went to John Lewis and looked at curtains, didn't he?
He went to wallpaper.
Wallpaper.
He went to John Lewis and was talking about wallpaper. And look, by the way, compare how Keir Starmer is received in the Prime Minister's questions, which, by the way, nobody watches. Nobody watches Prime Minister's questions. Very interesting. Yep, you can land a blur. Every 6 months, it might get on the 6 o'clock news. Great. But on an everyday basis, granular detail, nobody cares. Keir Starmer is there. People, the hashtags or the second referendum people, fantastic. This is forensic. People seem to think that he said things which mean Boris Johnson's going to go to prison. He's going to resign. I don't know. This kind of strange. They think that politics is like a true crime podcast. Although we're going to get some sort of Robert Mueller figure to arrest, Boris Johnson, wheel him off to, Pentonville prison. That's not going to happen, by the way. This is the reality. People haven't got huge asks from politicians. They want you to solve problems, and they don't want you to create any new ones. That's it. And they saw Brexit as a problem. You might disagree with that, but they thought Britain being in the EU was a problem. Enough people thought that was a problem. There was a referendum. It became a wedge issue. Boris Johnson appears, again, we can have that conversation. Maybe there's going to be major implications going forward. But right now, it looks like the Tories they've solved that problem. The vaccines looks like they solved that problem. Furlough looks like they solved that problem. Now, of course, it's easier for governments to pitch themselves like that. There are many things they haven't solved. 120,000 people have died. And people are saying, well, Boris Johnson, he's associated with getting things done. Yes, because Labour don't talk about the things he hasn't done. Of course. Keir Starmer is the biggest asset to Boris Johnson and the Tories right now. I said this the day that Jeremy Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party. Keir Starmer this guy is like the wingman for Boris Johnson in 2021. He's like Goose to Maverick in Top Gun.
That idea of Labour's strategy being to say the Tories are actually doing quite well, we're going to go into a bit more detail in a moment because I think it's super important. I think it is probably one of the biggest failings from the Labour front bench over the past year, them saying, the reason the Tories are doing well is because they're brilliant, essentially. But we're going to park that because we've got a great clip for you on that point. And we're going to go to a couple more comments. Werver Fugawi with 50 quid. Thank you very much. If you put up a snout in search of a trough candidate in a by-election, it is unsurprising that people don't vote for them. Keep up the good work for Novara. Very unkind way to talk about Paul Williams, but I mean, he hasn't particularly ingratiated himself to us, has he? Joshua Youngerman with a $10 donation says, I don't think Starmer or the Labour right understand what made Blair successful. Rhetorically, Blair was a populist who had a clear message. He didn't waste time in public spats with the left. I think that's a very good point. I mean, obviously, we do know that Tony Blair was very successful at attacking and suppressing the left within the Labour Party. But when he was asked, what's your vision for the country? He didn't say, my vision for the country is I'm going to be mean to the left. No, he did that quietly.
Michael,
no, I'm not saying Starmer should be mean to the left more quietly. No. I'm just saying it's less self-defeating than his version of it. Go on.
Can I quickly comment on that? That's partly true. But look, when Tony Blair, they had Clause 4 And they were like, how do we get this through? We're going to change the fundamental nature of the Labour Party. He got buy-in from trade union leaders. He got buy-in from his deputy leader, John Prescott. It was about building the consensus to take things in a certain direction. Keir Starmer has never tried to do that. The idea that he's, I don't like you say, Tony Blair, but you can't compare this guy to Tony Blair. This is like comparing, a centre forward down who plays for the Dog and Duck every Sunday to Lionel Messi, right? You have to like Lionel Messi. He's clearly very good at what he does. Tony Blair, in the run-up to 1997, was clearly a very good leader of the opposition. Incomparable. A buffoon is leading the Labour Party, Michael.
Kaz Mahoney with a fiver. Great show. Had to find a fiver to say thanks to Aaron for Passock on Thames on Twitter earlier. Finally, your tweets are bringing in the dough, bringing in the good stuff. Thank you very much, Kaz Mahoney. Holly Peacock with a fiver. Can you wish a happy birthday to the chair of Momentum Southampton, John Mitchell, on behalf of the members? Thanks for your work opposing free ports. Oh, very Although it'd be interesting to know, actually, because while I think free ports are a ridiculous idea, which just allow tax avoidance and basically, they don't increase trade or increase economic activity, they just move it. So the free port might bring a bit of, trade that would have been in a non-free port, and the person pays less tax. But what I'm saying, I'd be interested to see how you can sell that locally, because it seems the Tories have been quite effective at telling people that if you have a free port, that's good for your region. Probably one for another show. Bridget Quirk with £8. Thanks for giving us the only decent analysis of this mess, Novara. Can you please give a happy birthday shout out to my best pal and comrade, Jamie? Happy birthday to you, Jamie. And thank you to everyone for your kind donations. And we've had so many tonight, we can't keep up with all of them. But do know they are very much appreciated, because they help us build this organisation so we can respond to events like this. And it's really nice, actually, to see so many of you watching live tonight. We've got about 4,500 people watching live at the moment. What I want to go through now is some more of the results which have come through. We've mainly focused on Hartlepool so far. Obviously, there are many more results which we already know. The first one we go to, this was pretty dramatic, is Tees Valley. So the Tees Valley metro region had an election for their mayor, and the Tory incumbent was re-elected with a dramatically increased majority. So Houchin has 73% to 27% for the Labour Party. And you can see there, the Conservatives are up 33%, Labour are down 12%. I think it was 51-49 or 52-48. It's now 73-27. That is massive. That's an absolute wipeout. Aaron, again, we knew that the Tories were going to keep this, but did you think it was going to be by such a huge margin?
I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea, Michael, and it's a shame because Labour had a good candidate. But it was obvious. It was obvious about the trends, but we were told, because there was such a high. Ultimately, I had people yesterday, Michael, saying to me, particularly in the West Midlands, turnout's really low. It's going to be really hard to predict what's going on with the West Midlands mayor. Turns out, actually, it was pretty high. The problem was that there was actually a deluge of postal ballots, far higher than people thought. Originally, they thought postal ballots were maybe up 10-15% from what people were saying on doors, but actually it was far higher than that. And so that's why I think some of the prediction here has been really, really difficult. What I would say, Michael, is if you look at the national opinion polls, a lot of that is clearly way, way off. Clearly, right? These polls that show Labour are just 1 point behind the Tories. Nah. Even the polls that are showing Labour 10 points behind the Tories are looking quite optimistic right now.
Well, that's what this. The polls were very good for Ben Houchin, but the reality was
the national. No, of course. So no, okay. So we there was a story which is Labour are catching in the polls. Maybe they're doing poorly in the Red Wall, but they're doing better in the South and other parts of the country. Well, the results don't seem to bear that out. They're doing better in Scotland. They're not done terribly in Scotland, but the results don't seem to bear that out. So, we had something before Jeremy Corbyn, which was called the shy Tory. People told opinion polls, oh yeah, I'm going to vote Labour, because they felt, shy about being a Tory. Jeremy Corbyn comes in, people don't feel shy about saying, I hate Jeremy Corbyn. He's a, socialist. I don't want anybody like that anywhere near number 10 Downing Street. So the idea of the shy Tory goes away, and actually polling becomes a bit more accurate. If anything, it starts to understate what Labour's performance was. I think we've gone back to the shy Tory. I genuinely think even the polls that put the Tories 10 points ahead of Labour nationally, I don't think that's accurate. I think we're looking at devastation right now for Labour. I think if there was a general election now, Labour would be looking at under 30%. Like 2010, 28, 29%, like with Gordon Brown. Maybe lower, who knows?
Well, it looks a bit more like 2015 in the sense that Labour were actually polling quite reasonably, but then especially small C socially conservative seats, Labour were routed, so they massively underperformed the polls. Let's go through the English local elections in some detail. We have an update from you. So on the latest counts, the Conservatives are up 157 councillors. Labour are down 169 councillors. The Liberal Democrats are down 18 and the Greens are up 34. Now, when it comes to control of councils, the Conservatives have gained control of 8 councils and Labour have lost control of 4. Let's go through in some granular detail some of the key councils which have switched control. So one of the big stories here is Labour being, almost not wiped out, but Labour having a terrible night in the West Midlands. This was obviously strongly Leave voting, was once upon a time fairly strongly Labour voting. Not anymore. And we'll start with Dudley. So in Dudley, the Conservatives gained 12 seats and Labour are down 11 seats. UKIP are down 1 seat. That makes up the difference. The Conservatives gained 11 from Labour and 1 from UKIP. And the result is that Dudley now is controlled by the Conservatives. It was no overall control beforehand. We can go to NUNEATON, also in the West Midlands. This was 66% Leave during the Brexit referendum. Here, the Conservatives have gained 9 seats from Labour. Again, this is now a Tory council, which is a change from being no overall control in 2016. And we can go to Wolverhampton, again in the West Midlands. This was 63% Leave. And here the Conservatives have gained 5 seats from Labour. This is still a Labour hold, but you can see it's moving in very much the wrong direction. And in Sandwell, again, this is still a Labour hold, but the Labour Party have lost 9 seats to the Conservatives. So there you can see, many councils falling to the Conservatives. The councils which haven't are looking pretty vulnerable. Aaron, I know you've been sort of working a lot on the West Midlands recently. This is, incredibly worrying for Labour, right? And especially, I suppose, that they do still have, obviously, they had a pretty poor election in 2019 in the West Midlands, but they could go they could go backwards, right? It's not inconceivable they could lose quite a few more.
They could go backwards big time, Michael. Wolverhampton, you've got Pat McFadden in one of the Wolverhampton seats, very small majority, I think less than 2,000. He's going to go. That's the trend here, right? He's in the shadow cabinet. He's going to go. You've got Walsall, I think it's Walsall South, Valerie Vaz, or Walsall North, one of the Walsall seats. She's going to go. She's going to lose. You've got Zara Sultana in Coventry, looking really exposed. And by the way, she can still win that because there's going to be a big ground campaign in a general election. So it may be the left floods into 3 or 4 seats to help certain people. But that area generally has major problems. Sandwell, people can just check it out on Wikipedia or wherever. I think it's 70 councillors. It was entirely, there were no Tory councillors on the council until today. 9 wards were contested. All 9 were won by the Tories. And somebody I know in the West Midlands, a good source, said to me a week ago, they said Sandwell right now, this is as Labour as any council in the country. They said Sandwell will be the next Stoke. In 5 to 10 years, it will be in no overall control. We will lose it. And we're going to lose almost all the West Midlands except for a few seats in central Birmingham, which is a really astonishing thing to say. Labour can lose another 5 easily 5-6 more seats in the West Midlands. That's just one part of the country. Easily. So this is really, really big. We're not just talking about council seats here. We're talking also about members of parliament, and increasingly who they're going to be relying on in those big seats in Birmingham. It's primarily BAME voters. It's primarily low-income brown and black voters. The very people they take for granted. So before you know it, all it's going to take is Birmingham People's Party or something like that, and they're going to lose those seats too. So you're losing votes to your right, to your left. We've seen that elsewhere. We're going to talk about that, I'm sure, during the course of the show with the Greens. I don't think the Lib Dems are left, but they've lost Lib Dem council seats, for instance, in places like Sunderland. This is existential for Labour. This is really existential. I think Labour are headed for 150 seats in the next general election on this trajectory, but it could be much worse than that.
I think you're absolutely right that Sandwell was totally Labour dominated and has now, I mean, obviously lost a bunch of seats to the Conservatives. According to election maps, there were not just 9 seats up for grabs, there were 27 seats up for grabs, of which 9 went from Labour to Conservatives. So obviously the direction is all in one direction.
My apologies.
Labour held some.
My apologies. Can I correct that then? There was the
Yes.
yeah, it was the 9. It was the 9. It was the 9 that I was informed of. Also important to say that it wasn't all Labour. There were some independents and there were some that hadn't been filled in yet. But there were no Conservatives until today, and there's now 9 Conservatives. So not good. Does this sound well? Great. Yeah, exactly. This is pretty extraordinary.
We can also look at Essex. So it was a bad night for Labour in Essex. So we're in Harlow now, 68% leave. There were 13 seats up for grabs. 7 of them went from Labour to the Conservatives. So it is now Conservatives have 20 seats and Labour have 13. Before it was the other way around. So that has flipped from Labour to Conservative. And in Thurrock, the Conservatives have held that seat. They had it already, but they had a very good night. So 6 seats went from UKIP straight to the Conservatives. Labour did hold 4 seats in that particular election. And we can also go to Oldham. So this is in the northwest. So, I mean, generally the northwest is much less of a wipeout for the Labour Party. This is in Greater Manchester. But again, the direction of travel, not good. So Labour have lost 6 councillors in Oldham. The Conservatives have gained 4, and a local candidates have gained 2. The other part of the story is in cities. So in cities, of course, that is now Labour's big strongholds. In Gateshead, there were no changes. So from 2016, which is generally thought to have been quite a good election for the Labour Party, there have been no changes whatsoever, and it's a Labour hold. In Sunderland, it's still a strong Labour hold, but it wasn't so good. Labour have lost 9 seats there. 6 have gone to the Conservatives. 4 have gone to the Lib Dems, although the Greens have lost 1 as well. Sheffield is very interesting, though. So this is the phenomenon Aaron was talking about in terms of some Labour seats going to parties to their left. So Sheffield was controlled by the Labour Party after today's elections, or yesterday's elections, apologies. It is now in no overall control. So Labour lost 8 councillors on Sheffield Council. The Lib Dems gained 3, the Greens gained 5, and the Conservatives gained 1. So this could be, I mean, I think Sheffield's actually super, super interesting, Aaron, because most of what we've seen in these elections is seats basically going from Labour to Tories. It's pressure from their right, if you want to put it like that. I think, to be honest, if they were economically more left-wing, you could probably win back some of those voters. But talking about this traditionally, if it's voters going from Labour to the Tories, that's pressure from their right. What you're seeing in Sheffield is them losing voters to their left flank as well. So the Greens picking up 5 seats. That's fairly significant, isn't it? And that could cause problems in a general election when you've got first past the post, and when a split left vote can mean a Conservative gain. How worried do you think they should be about Sheffield?
I think actually that phenomenon goes well beyond Sheffield. I think they should be worried about Sheffield. Big student population, historically, elected sort of progressive Liberal Democrats like Nick Clegg. But if you look at somewhere like Oldham, we were just talking about Oldham Council. Jim McMahon is the MP there, 11,000 majority. But the Tories they're second, 11,000. You take in the Brexit Party vote. Let's say all of a sudden that majority becomes 5,000-6,000. You start to lose a couple of thousand votes to the Greens and the Lib Dems, who've got very low numbers in Oldham at the last election, because of course it was this, Progressive Alliance people were sort of voting for the party that was most likely to win or whatever. That's gone out the window, and all of a sudden, somewhere like Oldham looks like a real marginal. And so, yeah, of course, let's talk about the councils. But the Greens getting 4,000 or 5,000 votes in some of these places, even outside the major metropolitan areas like Sheffield, that could be that is a major issue for Labour. We saw inklings of that in the 2015 general election. The Greens got, I think, they got a very large number of votes. I think the best part of 1 million votes. And actually, the Green vote was bigger than the margin between the Tories and the Labour Party in about 15, 16 seats. I think it's going to be a lot more than that come the next general election. And particularly, the further right that Labour go, the worse that's going to be. So, huge problems. And again, this just never figured in the Starmer analysis. We just need to focus on these people in the red wall and drink beer and get flags out. I mean, my God, the thumb for this show with Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, it's like a fucking comedy. Excuse my French, right? But that was their analysis. It never accounted for the fact that you're not just going to lose votes to you're not just going to have a lower turnout because people aren't really enthused by you. You're going to lose votes to your right and to your left. Sheffield, I think, is the outstanding example of that, but I think it's going to grow as a phenomenon.
I mean, obviously, it might even be an example in yesterday's elections, but we just haven't got the results. Like, yeah, it will be very interesting to see what the London results are. For example, Labour is saying, "Oh, we're disappointed because too many people have voted someone else first choice." So sort of guilting the voters again. To round off our analysis of the English elections, we can show you, I think, as far as I know, this is the only council which we have confirmed which has gone from the Conservatives away from the Conservatives, in this case, only to no overall control. This is Cambridgeshire. This is a story where the Lib Dems have mainly gained. So the Conservatives are down 8 seats in Cambridgeshire. The Lib Dems are up 5, Labour are up 2, and an independent is up 1. Cambridge City, 74% remain, so we wouldn't expect the Tories to be making any gains there. I mean, the city centre already was only Labour and the Lib Dems. It's in South Cambridgeshire. You can see where the Lib Dems have made gains from the Labour Party, and then it's in the city centre where the Labour have made a couple of gains from the Lib Dems. South Cambridgeshire was 60% remains. This is presumably a story of more affluent southern voters and potentially young people moving out of the city centre because they're struggling to afford it anymore. But some signs that potentially you could see problems for the Tories in areas like this. But at the moment, on tonight's or last night's results, they're going to be very, very happy. Let's go to a couple more comments before we go to sort of rounding up a few more of the. I mean, to be honest, this show is weighted towards terrible analysis. We're not showing you much good analysis tonight. We're hopefully giving you that. We're going to go through some real howlers in a moment. Before we do that, Tom Cornford tweets on the hashtag Tysky Sour. Good to hear Aaron Bastani talking up the left and ripping into Starmer on Tysky Sour. Starmer is Labour's IDS. So Ian Duncan Smith. But remember, the Tories were back in power 7 years later. The lesson for the left is to build social movements and local activism and be ready after a disastrous 2024 election. Great comment, good attitude, some positivity in the house. It's very nice. Tim Allen with 499 in Liverpool, feeling more than ever at odds with England and can't stand where Starmer is heading. Thanks to you both for giving us a good laugh. Liverpool, of course, re-elected a Labour mayor, although with a lower vote share than before, although there's lots of complexities going on in Liverpool at the moment. But yeah, I mean, everyone, Liverpool is one of the saviours of England. Constantly, consistently, all Labour. I suppose a red wall that's not going to fall. Adamski tweets on the hashtag Tysky Sour. Aaron Bastani, best line of Tysky Sour tonight. Starmer is the goose to Johnson's Maverick. Combining 80s action flicks with contemporary politics is why I watch Novara Media on Friday nights. I haven't watched the relevant 80s action flick, I'm afraid, but I'm glad there was a connection there between Aaron and Adamski. Chris Hansel also tweets on the hashtag Tysky Sour. Aaron Bastani may have just coined the new political word of 2021. Political Dadaism needs its own Wikipedia page. And then Dennis Southall with 20 quid. We're taking his word for it because we haven't checked. Channel 4 poll shows the top reason given for not voting Labour in elections in England yesterday was Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. Oh, very interesting. We'll have to check that out when we get the chance. Love your perspective and analysis on Novara. Thank you so much for all of those comments. And I definitely want to check out that Channel 4 poll. Let's go straight on to our next story. There isn't a first rule of politics, but if there were one, it should probably be that in no circumstances should you tell voters that they'll be better off if they vote for the other guys. However, as Labour's dreadful results came in after the Hartlepool by-election, the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport did just that. It's a cringe-inducing moment. Let's take a look.
The reason why I support Keir Starmer is because he is serious, he's professional, and he will earn us the right to be heard. And that's what he's done in this campaign. But listen, it's a long journey. You know, the 2019 elections were not good elections for us. We knew it would take time to recover and rebuild that trust. And we're in the very early stages of that, and it will take time.
You say he's earned you the right to be heard, but clearly the voters of Hartlepool have not liked what they've heard from the Labour Party. They appear to, and you've virtually conceded, that they have voted for the Conservatives here. So something wrong with Labour's, either the message or the messenger.
But from a Hartlepool perspective, the Tory offer was compelling. Listen, look at the red wall seats surrounding you. Look at the investment in the Towns Fund, the Restoring Your Railways Fund, the free ports, and look what Tory MPs do when you elect them and the Tories funnel money towards them. And it's almost like a no-risk option. Listen, this by-election was never about changing the government. It was never about changing the Prime Minister. But it was a chance for people in Hartlepool to realise investment that for 11 years under the Tories, they have been denied. And it's clear that they've taken that choice.
I mean, I know what he was trying to do. He was trying to give a critique of pork barrel politics. Pork barrel politics is the idea that central government hands out investment and cash for political gain. So the critique of Boris Johnson is he is investing particularly in those towns which he wants the Conservatives to win, or particularly handing out cash where there are either Conservative mayors or Conservative MPs because he thinks that will help them stay in power. I can see what he's trying to do. But on the face of it, I mean, how that came across is you've got a shadow minister for the Labour Party saying, if you vote Tory in a so-called red wall area in somewhere like Hartlepool or a neighbouring region, you will be richer. You will be better off. You will get more investment, right? He's telling you to vote Tory. What does he have to say about the Labour Party? Keir Starmer's serious and professional, but the Tories, they'll bring about investment into your town. But he even says, look at the Tories in nearby towns, right? They're bringing in the money. It's a no-risk thing to do. He's basically a salesman for the Conservative Party. And his point there is that this is a by-election. In a general election, we'll have a very different message. One, it doesn't really work like that. If people remember, oh, the Tories bring investment, if you're reinforcing the Tories bring investment, they're not going to say, oh, in this general election, maybe on a net level, if we vote Labour, that would give us more investment. No, that's not how people think. And I suppose more immediately than that, Hartlepool isn't going to be the only by-election in the Northeast in the coming weeks and months. There's very likely to be one in West Yorkshire, in Batley and Spen, because there a Labour MP is very likely, unless there's a really catastrophic night for Labour, will have been elected as the mayor of West Yorkshire. And she said she'll stand down as an MP if that happens. It's going to be a by-election in a very nearby place. And you've got Labour frontbenchers saying, oh, to be honest, if you live in the north of England and you're a Brexit voting place, probably in your best interest to vote for the Conservatives. Maybe think about voting for us, though, because we're serious and professional. I mean, Aaron, these people are supposed to be professionals. You know, I mean, obviously they say we are professional. It's a bit like we're saying we have values. We are professional. Everything they do exudes the opposite of professionalism. That you're a Labour politician essentially telling people you'll be better off if you vote Tory. Yeah.
Well, it's like when Jeremy Corbyn and Labour in 2017 increased their share of the vote by 9.5%. And people saying he's not electable. Look, an election just happened and Labour increased its share of the vote by the most it's ever done since 1945. I mean, you can't say it's unelectable. You might not say they did enough to win or whatever, but there was an election. Again, electable isn't like a child isn't born electable, like with blue eyes or like dark hair. You know, it's not an adjective to describe like a human characteristics. I mean, he's tall or, you know, they have a deep voice. Electable is a reflection of how you do in elections. Crazy idea, I know. By the way, in Batley and Spen, Michael, there's a Labour majority of around 3,000 there. I personally think that's as good as gone. If Tracy Brabin no longer is going to be the MP there. And guess what? Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Rodney Starmer, you plonker, has already picked his candidate. Lotto have already selected their candidate. It's somebody who's not from the area and has a big flash. I think it's a Mercedes. So I'm sure that's going to go down really well. And I'm sure it'll be just as great a result as Paul Williams was in Hartlepool. Congratulations. The professionals are back. The grown-ups are running the Labour Party all over again.
I want to focus on what Jim McMahon said there, or what it made me think of, actually, because what you saw there was a Labour politician, a Labour frontbencher, essentially making excuses for why the Labour Party lost. And in making those excuses said, essentially, well, the Conservatives are very good and we're not very good. And this is what we've seen in the run-up to this election as well. I mean, I think probably the reasons they've lost this election are more to do with a longer-term story that involves essentially Brexit, also two leaderships who weren't particularly popular. Keir Starmer, it seems, evidently, from the polling, less. so than the previous one, or not from the polling, from the results. But this story that they've told, because they're more concerned with making excuses for the leadership and attacking the left, when they're asked, why are you polling poorly? They don't say, look, we're not interested in the polls. What we're interested in is selling our very concrete vision and saying what we're going to do is invest in a green industrial revolution, et cetera, et cetera. So we actually remember what they stand for. No, they say, oh, the reason we're polling poorly is because actually the Conservatives have had a really good pandemic. They're doing a really great vaccine rollout, and also the Labour Party is really shit. Labour Party has no connection to ordinary people. We have all of these extremist members. So yeah, the reason the Tories are doing really well is because they're great and we're shit. Right? It's the opposite of what you should do as a politician, because also it's not even honest. I mean, they say, oh, the reason we're doing bad is because the pandemic helps the Conservatives. The pandemic helps the Conservatives because even though they've made error after error after error, which led to one of the highest death tolls in the world, you didn't make it stick because you were too busy attacking people in your own party. And now when you're not polling very well, you're saying, oh, actually, no, the Tories are great. Vaccine rollout, brilliant. We're shit, right? It's not a way to win an election. And I want to show you how this reflects in political analysis, which was in The Simpsons. Which, when it comes to Donald Trump, when it comes to so many things, they do the best political analysis. And all of this reminds me of this old gag in The Simpsons about the US Democrats. So we can get this up. This is a cartoon of the Democratic Convention, and the banners are, we hate life and ourselves, we can't govern. Now, I can't think of a better parody of Keir Starmer's Labour at this point in time. You ask them, what's your vision? What do you offer? Oh, well, what we're going to do is we're going to change ourselves. We're going to change the Labour Party because no one likes us. And so how are you going to beat the other guys? Oh, it's going to be really hard to beat the other guys because actually they're doing really well. Right? That's literally the Labour Party strategy at this point in time. Why vote for us? I don't know, because they're great and we're shit. It doesn't work. Aaron, am I missing some element of this strategy? Am I being overly unfair?
No. We are basically, Owen said it on a great show, by the way, that you guys did on Wednesday. Owen said it, basically we're looking at what would the Labour Party have looked like if Liz Kendall was the leader. We're looking at it. This is the present leadership and the people at the top of the Labour Party running things that select Paul Williams, of all people, to be the candidate in Hartlepool. These are the people that, should have gone to Change UK or back Liz Kendall in the 2015 leadership election. They aren't even on the soft left. They aren't even on the centre. They're kind of just right-wing idiots. They're very bad at politics, incredibly bad at politics. That whole thing of, don't think of an elephant. What do you think of? Of course, you think of an elephant. What has Keir Starmer done for the last year? Talk about how incompetent Labour are, how bad the last leader was, and how they're useless, and how they're not listening to people. What was the message coming out from all of their people on the media this morning? The exact same thing. They are doing the complete opposite of what they should be doing if they actually want to win elections, if they actually want to improve their results. The complete opposite. So we have a few options here, and I think we have to look at the most plausible explanation. One is that Keir Starmer is honestly a plant from the state to destroy the Labour Party. And by the way, he's doing so poorly. I don't even if the British states we need to destroy the Labour Party, send somebody in, even this would exceed all expectations, right? I don't think that's true. So let's discard that. They are listening to the best available data and analysis, and that's telling them what to do. I don't believe that, because you wouldn't have picked Paul Williams as a candidate in a seat which voted 70% leave. So the only conclusion is, Michael, we're dealing with people who are leading a political party with more than 200 MPs, which did have until quite recently 500,000 members. I'm sure it'll continue to fall precipitously, which haven't got a clue. Which have not got a clue. I don't know what street you live in, our viewers right now, what road you live on. There'll probably be somebody within about 100 meters of you who could do a better job of leading the Labour Party than Keir Starmer right now. I really believe that. I really, really, really believe that. Very difficult job leading the opposition, but this caliber of leadership, wow. We are looking at a really substandard group of people running this show. Terrible. And people really laid it on thick with Corbyn, but you never saw the pub scene that we saw in Bristol. You never saw him go to churches which were anti-LGBT, basic risk management. And now you're seeing stuff like this, basic communications errors, effectively, where you're saying the absolute worst thing you can in the response to possibly the worst set of election results in Labour Party history over one night. I just think they're incompetents. They shouldn't even be in politics. Forget running the Labour Party. Keir Starmer shouldn't be an MP. He shouldn't be a politician. He should have stayed in law. Ed Miliband, what did you do by saying to Keir Starmer, please have this safe seat in central London? You should be an MP. Why did you do that?
Your analysis there leads on very well to a couple of questions we've got. So Tom Ackland tweets on the hashtag Tysky Sour. Do you think Keir Starmer should resign? Seriously, what do you think would happen, and could it? And very much related, Chris Hill with 30 quid asks, okay, if the Labour Party is still part of the solution, what can be done to get rid of Starmer and his crowd? So I suppose, in summary, should Keir Starmer resign, and how would one make that happen?
I think somebody that wins the leadership deserves a fair crack of the whip. So I never thought I would say that he should resign before a general election. However, I can see why a certain number of Labour MPs would call on him now to resign, because the reality is a lot of them are going to lose their seats. So that's down to them. As a pundit watching this, I think if people want Labour to not lose lots of seats the next election, yes, they should probably call on Keir Starmer to resign. And by the way, I don't think this is going to turn. He's not going to turn it around. Look at the response to all of this over the last 24 hours. This morning, the guy he's surrounded by delusional sycophants. His chief political advisor, Jenny Chapman, was at the counter for this thing. She was organising a cabinet reshuffle at 5 a.m. on the phone, while Paul Williams is having a breakdown and leaving the event. His political career is completely ruined after she told him to run for this thing. They wanted an ally thinking this was a safe seat. This is like a cartoon comedy. This is like the Teletubbies, right? You're meant to be taking this seriously. So I can see why somebody looks at all that and goes, come on, Keir, for you, for the Labour Party, for your own mental well-being, let's do self-care. Let's see you leave. Close the door on your way out. I get that. At the same time, I think it's fair to say if Labour lose Batley and Spen, he has to go, yes. If Labour lose that, he has to go. Because realistically, you're looking at 100, 150 seats the next election. I think that has to be a resignation question. Equally, he could win that then, and that enforces him, and that gives him some momentum, and he would deserve it. So I think for me, Batley and Spen is the one where you say he should resign or not.
I mean, I definitely think it's too early to call for him to resign. I do think, it's a good precedent that you should get a decent amount of time after being democratically elected by the party membership, that you should be given some time to work on that. I mean, again, I have no real confidence it's going to change course, but at the same time, I also think if there were to be a leadership challenge mounted, it could potentially energize him in the same way that it energized Jeremy Corbyn. Although, I mean, in the case of Jeremy Corbyn, it energized someone who was then able to put forward their positive vision. Keir Starmer, that would probably just energize him to say, the problem I have is that the left have been too aggressive. I mean, I think that could potentially feed into a narrative he'd like. I don't think it's going to happen in the near future, but definitely within a year or so, that will be very much an open question. What we need is to have ready-made left-wing MPs who could take on that mantle. The other question there is, do we have them yet, or would it be someone else from the right of the Labour Party that managed to take over? And there are a couple more questions which I am going to save for later and go straight to our next section. Peter Mandelson is an arch Blairite, an advisor to Keir Starmer, and was a key backer of a second EU referendum. In the wake of Labour's catastrophic defeat in Hartlepool, Mandelson was invited onto Radio 4's Today programme to give his post-mortem. Now, this was one of the most shameless examples of motivated reasoning I think I've heard this year. Let's take a listen.
Let me just say this about the by-election, because I think it needs saying. It was a very strange by-election like no other I have been in. I mean, actually, the reasons for the defeat, if I really had to boil them down to two things, I would say they were two C's, COVID and Corbyn. With a bit of Brexit, previous Brexit Party voters backing the man, Boris Johnson, who delivered them Brexit, and also promises of a large dollop of Tory government money thrown in for good measure. And all this as a whole turned out to be too heady a cocktail for Labour's campaign to take on.
Obviously, what's happened, he's a smart guy. Peter Mandelson is a clever guy. He's gone on the radio. He advises Keir Starmer. He's very close to him. And he's saying, I have to go on and blame something other than Keir Starmer. He also, which wasn't mentioned in the interview, I think it probably should have been, sat on the board of the People's Vote campaign. Right, so he was one of the main pushers of a second referendum, and I think actually one of the key people trying to push that on the Labour Party to undermine Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. He can't blame Brexit, so he has to blame other things. It's not Starmer's fault. It's not the fault of Brexit. The problem, he says, COVID and Corbyn. Now, I mean, there's a couple of reasons it's completely stupid. So the COVID one, actually, let's start with, because that's exactly the same line which is explicitly pushed by Keir Starmer. Normally, they try and say Corbyn in slightly hushed tones because they think it's going to be, going to seem a bit uncouth to say it outright. They normally sort of imply it. We had a terrible election. COVID, though, they do bring up all the time. And why this is stupid is because you can't say, of course, we're going to lose election because of COVID. Because you can just as easily make the opposite argument, right? Joe Biden didn't say, oh, of course we were going to lose because of COVID. No, he said, we're going to win because Donald Trump has dealt with COVID terribly. Now, the vaccine rollout has gone very well. But before that vaccine rollout, there were a series of decisions which were made by the Prime Minister which killed people's grannies, right? Which led to the deaths of many people in many people's families who were friends of friends, etc. Lots of people know people who lost their lives in the second wave of coronavirus, and they lost their lives because of the terrible decisions, inexcusable decisions made by Boris Johnson. Now, the reason people associate Boris Johnson with vaccines and the furlough instead of associating him with tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths is because Keir Starmer has done such a poor job in opposition of holding him to account, right? You can't just say, oh, of course it was going to go badly because of COVID. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good argument. Now, the second, he's saying, oh, as well as COVID, the problem was Corbyn. Now, the obvious reason this is ridiculous is because they have gone backwards since Corbyn was leader. People, they really expect us to believe that there were some voters who voted for Labour under Corbyn who have now switched to the Conservatives because they don't like Corbyn, because of the shadow of Corbyn. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I know this isn't going to be a surprise to you, but I do think it is worth going through those results, right? 2017, Labour was led by Corbyn. They supported Brexit in this election. They thought we should respect the result of that election. Labour got 52% of the vote, an absolute majority of the vote. In 2019, Labour, again, was led by Jeremy Corbyn. This time around, they opposed Brexit. They wanted a people's vote, a second referendum, that thing that Peter Mandelson was campaigning so vigorously for. Then they got 37.7%, so a significant drop from the previous election, 14.8 percentage points down from the previous election, but enough to win. In 2021, Labour is no longer led by Jeremy Corbyn, and it's led by the architect of Labour's turn to remain. In this election, Labour gets 28.7% of the vote, so down 9 points from 2019. Still after this, there is no way that you can say, the reason we did really badly in 2021 was because of Corbyn and COVID, when it's so clearly not Corbyn and it so clearly is Brexit, right? It's shameless. To give Nick Robinson some credit, he did push Peter Mandelson on this issue of the Brexit question. Let's see where the conversation went next.
The problem with this analysis, let me just put it to you this way, is that both you and John McDonnell appear to be in denial about Brexit. Hartlepool voted for... Let me just finish the thought, if I could. Hartlepool voted 70%, and the Labour Party then found a Remainer, someone who said Brexit would be a disaster. You put him up as your candidate. You effectively said to the electorate of Hartlepool, you're all idiots. You were all taken in. You made a mistake. Now change your mind.
You're wrong to obsess about Brexit. I accept, and it's worthy of further examination, the extent to which Brexit is affecting and overlaying social and cultural attitudes and voting behaviour over normal economic and class divisions within our society. It is quite possible that as a result of Brexit, people are learning new habits of voting, in Northern England and elsewhere. But believe it or not on one door that I knocked did a single voter mention Brexit to me. The one thing they did raise with me, however, was Jeremy Corbyn. He is still casting a very dark cloud over Labour. Labour voters are not letting this off lightly. He still gets them going on the doorstep. I mean, one person said to me, "Sort yourselves out. Sort yourselves out. You picked the wrong brother and you ended up with Corbyn, so that's goodbye to you. When you've sorted yourselves out, we'll look at you again." And that is what the Labour Party has got to do.
No, I can't. There's no way for me to prove that anecdote from Peter Mandelson is false. right? I didn't knock on any doors actually in Hartlepool. I didn't go up to Hartlepool. So Peter Mandelson has knocked on more doors than I have. And he's saying not a single person mentioned Brexit, but loads of people mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. And also one particular person had the exact same obsession as Peter Mandelson, which was that in 2010, 11 years ago, the person who should have won the leadership election was David Miliband instead of Ed Miliband. So essentially, just like Peter Mandelson, they're blaming essentially the trade unions in the 2010 Electoral College for what's going on now. Now, you can make your own mind up if that's credible. As I say, I've got no way of knowing if that happened to be true. It's just a very convenient reality for Peter Mandelson to speak about. One person who did knock on a lot of doors, though, and doesn't agree with Peter Mandelson that all voters could talk about was Jeremy Corbyn, potentially the Electoral College in 2010, was the candidate himself, Paul Williams. So awkwardly for Peter Mandelson, during the campaign, Williams told Sky, "Nobody has mentioned Jeremy Corbyn to me during this election so far. People are looking to the future. People can see the Labour Party is under new management with new leaders nationally." So the candidate, presumably knocking on more doors than anyone. No one's mentioned Jeremy Corbyn to him. It just so happens that when Peter Mandelson knocks on the doors, all people can talk about is Jeremy Corbyn. No one mentions Brexit, which just so happens is the issue where Peter Mandelson is very, very, very implicated in the votes that Labour is losing in that constituency. But they all mention just those issues, which Peter Mandelson would love to bring up on the Today programme on Radio 4. For me, as I say, I don't have proof, but it makes me suspicious. I'm not sure it stacks up. Aaron, I want your take on that interview with Peter Mandelson there. I mean, we don't normally go to him for honest, good analysis on political realities, but I thought that was, exceptionally, as I say, I don't have proof of it, but it just sounded to me shameless and dishonest.
Well, this, Michael, if this was a court of law, you have to judge somebody on their previous actions, their character, their record, other witnesses. Were there other witnesses that saw this, Peter? It doesn't sound like it. Certainly Paul Williams didn't see it. Okay. Does this chap have a good character, history of lying? He's had to resign twice from the cabinet for corruption. Again, producer Fox doesn't need to worry. It happened. This isn't, me going OTT. He had to resign from the cabinet because he got caught doing some really naughty things. So, sorry, Peter Mandelson, I'm looking at your record. I'm looking at the fact you've previously said you worked every day relentlessly to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming the Prime Minister and no longer be the leader of the Labour Party. And you're saying something which I have to question. And like you say, Michael, we can't be. You are such an intellectually generous, honest guy. We can't be for sure. We can't. You're absolutely correct to say we can't falsify what he has said. But I also think it's fair to say that in the broader context of what we know about Peter Mandelson, it's almost certainly not true. Again, the guy is just shameless. This guy, look, what's he doing on BBC Radio 4? He should be in the Natural History Museum. The man is a political fossil. A political fossil.
I hate those weasel words as well, where you say the problem isn't Brexit, but it might have given people new voting habits. Now, how did they get those new voting habits, right? Because there was a Brexit referendum, and after that referendum, Labour got 52% of the vote. They massively increased their vote share. That was after the referendum. They got new voting habits because the Labour Party, under pressure from people like Peter Mandelson, adopted a position to reverse the referendum result, right? Yeah. So you can't say, it's just Brexit that gave them new habits. No, it was the People's Vote campaign that gave them new voting habits. And the People's Vote campaign was, by the way, run by you. Right. So it's just this. You've got to respect the guy for being so shamelessly able to try and remove himself from any responsibility for anything bad that happens in the Labour Party, even though he so clearly has some responsibility. I feel I should. Is it definitely corruption, or was it? I know that he sort of took a loan that he didn't reveal. Is corruption a strong word? Yeah, he had to resign. He had to definitely resign.
He wasn't arrested by the police. Whatever you want to say, he wasn't arrested. I'm not saying that he was guilty of criminal behaviour, but he fell short when it came to the ministerial code of conduct. What would you call that? He fell
short of the standards expected of a politician. And there was definitely some dishonesty going on. I just want us to be watertight.
Dishonesty. Sorry. Let me just retract that. By the way, for the sake of Peter Mandelson's lawyers going back over this in a couple of hours' time, Peter Mandelson was dishonest and he fell short of the appropriate standards expected in public office by an elected official, and that's why he had to resign twice from the cabinet.
That sounded that was good, Aaron. I'm into that. Right. If you are enjoying tonight's show, you want to make sure we can do more shows, make sure we can be legally watertight and no one can sort of attack us and try and bring the organization down, then the thing that matters more than anything is you become regular donors. And so if you are not already, please do go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. If you do so already, thank you so much. You're the reason we can do these live streams 3 nights a week. And we're going to be moving to more regular, higher quality. The only way is up if we can keep our subscriptions up, which at the moment they are. We're so grateful for that, for you making all of this possible.